Hi, everybody. So in this video, I'm going to summarize some work that I and others have done on this question of whether machines can think. And I want to start here with Blaise Pascal from the 17th century. He actually put me onto this whole question in his book, De Pensées there. And in this rather cryptic quote, um, he obviously thinks there's something kind of logically incoherent in the whole idea of a thinking machine. Okay, if we try to sort of form a clear conception of a thinking machine, somehow we fail. We can't coherently imagine that. Something along those lines. Anyway, I'm going to argue here that Pascal was right. So here's just some of the sources that I'm using. Obviously, some of these are mine, going back to my MA thesis, 1991. I came across that Pascal quote when I was an undergrad, around probably 1987, I think. So been looking at this for a while. Still not entirely happy, but I came across this paper at the bottom here by Luna, a Spanish logician, 2016. Where he brings in what's called the Pinocchio paradox as a way to clarify the argument. And I think that's very helpful. So that's what inspired me to make this video. Okay, so the rough overview is that we're going to try to refute materialism or physicalism, particularly as applied to human beings that say essentially we're just sort of complex robots, not different in principle from other machines. And the part of this idea that leads to contradiction is that it places human thoughts, possible thoughts of a human, into kind of one-to-one correspondence with the possible states of whatever machine we are. Okay, and initially, you might think, well, why not? You know, we have to be made of something. What is it about matter that makes it so unsuitable for making a thinking being? So I'll try to answer that here. I want to start with another argument against the idea of thinking machines, which comes from Leibniz, several decades after Pascal. Very simple argument. So he says, let's suppose we've got a thinking machine, like this one down here, for example. It's supposed to be a picture of a thinking machine. And he says, well, let's enlarge it so we can see everything that's going on. Make it as big as a windmill, okay? And then we can walk around inside and see what's going on. Basically, we won't see any thinking going on, nothing that would explain consciousness or anything like that. So obviously, Leibniz is assuming that matter and machines and so on are fully intelligible. We might say conceptually transparent or transparent to the mind. Like Euclidean geometry, for example, there's nothing sort of mysterious about a triangle or a circle. These are abstract concepts that we understand completely. And matter, certainly in the old days of the ancient Greek materialists, was basically just a geometrical substance. That is a kind of stuff that could be completely described using geometry, which is transparent to the mind. And that's basically the same today. Of course, physics has come a long way since Epicurus and Democritus, but it has that same feature that we use mathematics to describe the physical world, because the physical world is completely intelligible. There's nothing sort of mysterious or incomprehensible about the physical world. So that's what makes, I think, matter unsuitable for being what thinking beings are made of. The fact that it's actually comprehensible to the mind. Okay. Now, I guess, you know, if we were walking around inside this machine and we could completely understand it and we didn't see anything there that would look like a thought, we might be inclined to agree with Leibniz. But actual human bodies are much more complex than that. They're way beyond what we ourselves are able to understand. Okay, just for some examples here, we've got these molecular machines displayed by, you know, computer graphics. think that's kinesin on the left, and ATP synthase. But the human body and the brain and so on are stuffed with these. A single cell is just beyond comprehension in its complexity. So maybe as long as it's complex enough, it's effectively not transparent. It's effectively opaque. Okay. Well, philosophers at this point will often refer to Laplace's demon, fictional being of sort of unlimited intellectual power or something like that, ability to do math calculations and so forth. So that the human brain, even if it's, as it is, incredibly complex, is still physical. It's still, if it's still physical, it's still fully intelligible to Laplace's demon. Like all these complicated machines here, you can break them down and you can see how each bit works and so forth, understand how the whole thing works. Yeah, Laplace's demon, this is an artist's representation of Laplace's demon. Laplace himself brought in the demon because he basically wanted to say that a deterministic system is one where you can predict what will happen in the future, given the laws of physics and the exact state at one moment in time. But he couldn't say that because the math is too hard. We can't actually predict what will happen in the universe. So he sort of brought in Laplace's demon. Okay, well, it's predictable in principle by a sufficient intellect, like Laplace's demon. In thinking about whether physicalism is true, philosophers often refer to a similar kind of figure, Mary the neuroscientist, a sort of future superhuman neuroscientist who can understand the brain completely and so forth. Okay, so what do materialists say about thought? I mean, the details vary between theory, but they all agree that since all facts about the universe are physical facts, can be described entirely in physical terms, so facts about what a person is believing or hoping for at a given moment are physical facts about them, probably about their brain. So if Messi believes that he can play another season, that's some physical fact about Messi. And if Laplace's demon was around and could look at Messi's brain and understand all of Messi's physical properties, Laplace's demon would know, could read Messi's mind and know that he believes he can play another season. Just as we know that the temperature of a gas is sort of reduces down to the mean kinetic energy of its molecules. So, a person's beliefs reduced to some physical state that's obviously a lot more complex than that. And this might seem very obvious, particularly in this day, the day of robots and robocars. And this particular kind of car, it'll show you on a screen what its own internal representation is of the road in front of it, with all the various obstacles. It just seems like this car understands its environment, and it's guided by that understanding. So it just looks like it's a rational being, same as us, so therefore we're machines too. So I'm going to argue against that view by using a so-called diagonal argument. And this is a pretty common trick used in mathematics and logic that is used to disprove certain kinds of claim, generally claims that there are two sets of objects that stand in a one-to-one correspondence. They can be sort of paired off with each other. So Cantor, a mathematician in the 19th century, he disproved this idea that every set of natural numbers can have its own unique code number, which is also a natural number. He showed that in a sense there's more sets of natural numbers than there are numbers. It was Gödel who disproved the second one, his famous incompleteness theorem. We're going to look at this Pinocchio case that Luna brought up, and then we're going to look at materialism. So all of these I think, can be disproved by diagonal arguments. Well, what is a diagonal argument? Let's take a very, very simple case that's sort of like a finite version of the Cantor theorem. So, you know, binary sequences of binary digits 0 and 1. If you have a 5-bit sequence, how many 5-bit sequences are there? Well, you probably know there are 32. Okay, but suppose somebody claimed there were just 5, and in particular, these are the 5. So in other words, they think the 5-bit sequences can be placed into one-to-one correspondence with the numbers 1 to 5, as shown on the table. Well, obviously that's not right, but we can show that it's not right using a diagonal argument, and that involves constructing a new sequence, sometimes called a diagonal sequence, where you take the first bit of the first sequence, second bit, the second sequence, and so on. So you see we're kind of going along the diagonal here, hence the name, and we end up with the sequence 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. Now, that's actually not quite the sequence we want. We want the inverted diagonal. We want to change that a little bit. Notice that the diagonal sequence is actually here in the table. That's not always the case, but it can be in the table. But if we change every member of the diagonal sequence to the other possible bit, zeros to ones and ones to zeros, then we get a new sequence, 5-bit sequence, that's definitely not going to be on the table. We can guarantee in advance without even looking that it's not there. And I guess it's fairly clear why, because the first bit of the inverted diagonal differs from the first sequence in the list, because we obtained it by changing the first term of the sequence. And the inverted diagonal is also different from the second sequence because we changed the second bit, the second sequence, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be different from every sequence on the list, just by the way it's constructed. Okay. So that gives you some idea of what a diagonal construction looks like, but not all diagonal arguments actually involve a literal diagonal on a table. So I'm going to show you that the same construction can be done in a way that doesn't have an obvious diagonal. So first of all, a binary sequence here can easily be converted into a set of natural numbers because, you know, we've got the first term, the second, third, fourth, and fifth. So we could interpret this 1, 0, 1, 0, 1 as representing the set 1, 3, 5, because it's a 1 in its first, third, and fifth term. So let me write that in. We could consider that the set 1, 3, 5. The second one would be the set 2, 4, and so on. So I've done that on the next slide. 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, and so forth. Now, are those all the sets that can be formed out of the numbers 1 to 5? Obviously not. Again, there's 32 of those, not 5. And I'm going to show that there's at least one set missing from that table by another kind of diagonal construction, non-sort of literal diagonal. So to do that, we want to define what it is for a code number to be inclusive. And what it means is that the code number is a member of its corresponding set. Okay, so is the code number 1 a member of the set 1, 3, 5? Well, yes, it's right there at the first member. Okay, so that is inclusive. Second one, 2, is that a member of 2, 4? Yes. 3, nope, it's not there. 4, nope. And 5, 1, 2, 5, yes. Okay, so 3 of the 5 code numbers are inclusive, 2 aren't. And now we want to form the set of non-inclusive code numbers. So notice the non here. So following the set of inclusive code numbers is kind of like the diagonal, whereas if you take non-inclusive code numbers, it's equivalent to the inverted diagonal. Okay. So the set of non-inclusive code numbers is where we've got n's here, so that's the set whose only members are 3 and 4. That's the set of non-inclusive numbers. Now, is that going to be on our list? I mean, you can check. It's not there. Okay. So no, but you don't even need to check. You can tell in advance that it can't be, because if it's on the list, if it's on the list, it would have to have a code number, and let's call its code number D for diagonal. And then there's the question about whether D is inclusive. Is D inclusive? Because inclusive is sort of a well-defined property here. It's either a member of its corresponding set or not. In other words, is D either 3 or 4? What if D is inclusive? Well, because it's supposed to be the set of all non-inclusive code numbers, and it's itself inclusive, it couldn't be a member of the set, right? Okay, so in that case, it's non-inclusive. But if it's non-inclusive, it's supposed to be the set of all non-inclusive code numbers. So that means that it should be part of the set. So whichever way we try it, we get a contradiction. And that tells us that there is no such code number D, and therefore the set is not on the list. And this is exactly how Cantor proved his famous theorem about the number of sets of numbers being greater than the number of natural numbers. All right, so this is actually virtually identical to the diagonal construction I'm going to use with materialism. Okay. Yeah, so we're going to disprove materialism by constructing a diagonal thought. And the reason why we're able to do this is, again, because of the transparency of physical systems, of matter. So, I mean, a thinking machine could think thoughts about the physical basis that constitutes its own thoughts. It's a bit like a computer thinking about its own circuit diagram or something like that, thinking about its own transistors. Now, we're going to get a contradiction. That's the easy part. The hard part is to address the criticism that we've just created another paradox. Okay, there's plenty of paradoxes out there. Generally, they're created by some kind of circularity. And so they're kind of spurious contradictions. They're contradictions that don't show anything interesting. They just show that you've broken some rules. Other diagonal arguments leading to contradictions provide proofs, like Gödel's proof of the incompleteness theorem. And also Cantor's theorem are proofs. So the hard thing is to decide, to figure out whether the diagonal argument we give is sort of a valid argument or just sort of breaking some rules, making a circular argument or something like that. Okay, so it's really helpful to look at this Pinocchio case because it's very similar, really, to materialism in certain respects. Simpler, but otherwise similar. So we're probably familiar with the story of Pinocchio. This is a slight modification from how it works in the movie. I think in the movie, the nose grows only when he's telling a lie. So he knows he's saying something false. Here, it's just enough that he says something false, whether it's intentional or not. Okay, a simpler case. Now, that doesn't seem to involve any contradiction, but it does if Pinocchio, here he is, if he's able to say, my nose is growing now, that creates a contradiction if we assume the Pinocchio law. Well, why is that? By the way, that's the Pinocchio sentence is a very simple case of a diagonal sentence. Why does it lead to contradiction? Well, I mean, if the Pinocchio law is right, then and it's, let's say, true that his nose is growing now, that's a true sentence, well then, because the nose grows only when he's saying something that's false, it would also have to be a false sentence. So if it's true, then it's false. But similarly, if it's false, then his nose isn't growing, and that means, according to the law, he's saying something true. So if it's false, then it's true. So we're unable to assign either true or false to the Pinocchio sentence. Now, we're familiar with this from semantic paradoxes. The liar paradox, for example, we're going to talk about in a moment. It's just another paradox. But the thing is, here, as we'll see, my nose is growing now cannot be a paradoxical sentence because it's just making a physical claim. It's talking about this physical object, the nose, and it's positing some physical property of growing to the nose. So sentences like that can't be paradoxical. They can't sort of fail to have a truth value. So the only way we can make sense of this situation is to reject the Pinocchio law. All right, if Pinocchio is able to describe his own nose, then Pinocchio law at least has to be restricted. Maybe it can be true for most sentences, but it can't be applied to the Pinocchio sentence. Okay. So the liar sentence is quite similar, but crucially different. So the liar sentence is the sentence that says, I am false, the sentence is false, that kind of thing. And it has this same feature. If you say that the liar sentence is true, then it has to be false. So it can't be true. Well, if it's false, then that makes it true. So it can't be false either. You can't seem to assign any truth value to the liar sentence. And the same is true of the Pinocchio sentence, but that's, of course, assuming the Pinocchio law. If the Pinocchio law is false, then all bets are off. But there's no such assumption behind the liar sentence. We're not sort of making such an assumption to get this feature that it can't be true or false. Also, another difference, as I mentioned, is that Pinocchio sentence is just a statement of physics. It's clearly meaningful. It clearly will be either true or false every time it's uttered, whereas the liar sentence is paradoxical. So I'm going to argue then that the diagonalization that I do on materialism is like the Pinocchio sentence. It's not like the liar sentence. Okay, it's properly grounded and so forth. All right, now for a bit of background here, because we're going to be talking about so-called intentionality propositions and things like that. I want to give a bit of that background. So sentences obviously describe reality. I'm going to say, the moon is, 300,000 kilometers from the Earth or whatever it is. I'm making a statement about reality. Okay. But sentences don't have intrinsic meaning. They only have the meaning that we kind of put into them. In other words, there has to be a mind that sort of interprets the sentence and forms what we call a proposition. So a proposition or thought in your mind is what the sentence expresses, but it's actually the thought that describes reality directly. Okay. And well, how does it do that? What is a proposition exactly? Now there's various accounts that philosophers have put forward. I'm just going to present one account rather quickly that I think is the best account, where a proposition is, as it were, part of someone's mental map of reality. Okay. And, if a sentence fails to express a proposition, which happens sometimes, particularly with the liar sentence, for example, doesn't express a proposition, that's what we mean by a meaningless sentence. Okay, so in terms of how propositions work, let's take a simple sentence. The cat is on the mat. And this view of propositions understands a proposition basically in terms of the effect that it has on someone's mental map, assuming they accept it. Okay, so let's take a person whose current belief is represented by this diagram here. So you notice there's three kind of transparent cats, ghostly cats in different places. That's supposed to represent that they don't know where the cat is, and there's three possible places in their mind, each with a certain probability. That's why the cat is not solid. It's supposed to be only a certain probability that it's there. But then somebody tells them the cat is on the mat and they believe it. What happens to their mental map? Well, the two cats that are under the table and on the chair, they sort of disappear, and the cat on the mat becomes sort of solid, probability 1. So that sort of rearrangement of your mental furniture that happens when you come to accept a new proposition or come to believe a sentence, that sort of change is the proposition on this view. So you can say that a proposition is an information vector that changes a person's mental map of the world. Okay, so whatever you think about propositions, they have something to do with mental representations, and a complete mental map will consist of thousands of propositions. Anyhow, that's the basic idea. Now, this term intentionality is quite an important term in philosophy. Now, notice that the previous slide assumes that our mental map is able to represent reality, that this is not just an interesting thought in someone's mind, but it actually kind of corresponds to the real world. And this feature of the mind and of propositions is called intentionality. Okay, that means something like representation or aboutness, meaning, these sorts of things. Okay, so now sentences also sort of have intentionality. If somebody sees a sentence and interprets it as expressing a certain proposition, then it connects to the world, which is this intentionality feature. But this is not original or intrinsic intentionality. Like the word dog doesn't intrinsically mean dogs. It's only established by convention. Okay, so we call that derived intentionality, or sometimes extrinsic intentionality. It requires someone to come along and interpret it. Now, if materialism is true, then machines like us must have actual original intentionality. Like if I have a certain thought, it's not just that I can be interpreted as having that thought. I just have it. I'm aware of that thought in my head and so on, consciously aware of it. So if materialism is true, then machines would have the same thing, because we are machines in that view. All right, now let's get back to this idea of what's different about the liar sentence and the Pinocchio sentence. And I've claimed that the liar sentence is meaningless. Well, there are certainly meaningful sentences that are very similar to the liar sentence. Like if we have this conversation here between Jack and Jill, Jack says the cat is on the mat. Jill says that sentence is false. In other words, the cat is not on the mat. But what she says is very similar to the liar sentence. It's a sentence that simply asserts the falsehood of another sentence. Okay, but there's a key difference here, because Jill's sentence is a perfectly meaningful sentence, saying the cat is not on the mat, effectively. It derives its meaning because it's getting it from the meaning of Jack's sentence, and Jack's sentence already has meaning. And that doesn't happen with the liar sentence, as we'll see in a moment. So the liar sentence, we might say, is kind of ungrounded, because it just refers to itself in this way. So, if you have a sentence of the form S is false, it's fine as long as there's an existing meaning of the sentence S, as there was in this Jack and Jill case. All right, Jack's sentence is perfectly meaningful already. So it's kind of like this. S has a meaning, and that provides sort of a basis or a foundation for the statement S is false to have a meaning. But if S is the sentence S is false, so a sentence is asserting its own falsehood, then you get this kind of circularity. S is false. What is S? That's S itself. So we're sort of looped around on ourselves here. So there just really isn't any meaning there. There's no sentence really that you're asserting to be false. It's a bit like, let's say you're working as a sailor on a ship, and you ask the captain, "What should I do?" And he says, "You should follow your orders." Yeah, but what are my orders? Should I raise the mainsail or drop the anchor? Oh, I told you, you should follow your orders. Your orders are to follow your orders. Uh, you're in the dark. You don't know what you should be doing at that point. There's no real order there. Okay, now the Pinocchio sentence is grounded. It's not like the liar sentence. Why is that? Well, as I've already said, because it's a straightforward claim about the physical properties, length of a physical object, the nose. There it is. Okay. So obviously the Pinocchio sentence doesn't refer to any other sentence. It's going to be true or false. We don't necessarily know which, right? Once we realize that the Pinocchio law is false, then we just don't know whether it's going to grow or not, but it's got to do one or the other, right? All right. Now, another way to think about it, if the Pinocchio law were true, then the Pinocchio sentence would be, well, it would be paradoxical, because then it's basically the liar sentence. But at the same time, it would have to be non-paradoxical, because it's a straightforward claim about a physical object. So it would have to be paradoxical and non-paradoxical at the same time. Obvious contradiction. So another way to see that the Pinocchio law has to be false. Yeah, now how does it manage to sort of cause this sort of trouble? Well, basically because it connects physical facts, the length of a nose, with semantic fact, that is whether a sentence is true or false. And that sort of connection between physical facts and semantic facts allows you to make a semantic claim about the sentence being false via a straightforward physical claim. I don't know if that makes sense. I kind of drew a diagram here. So, there's the sentence, my nose is growing, which is a sentence about the nose, right? It's a straightforward physical claim, no problem. Not paradoxical. But then suddenly, because of the Pinocchio law, if the nose is, let's say, growing, let's say it's true that the nose is growing, Pinocchio law then says the sentence is false, and suddenly it has become effectively the liar sentence. So that's how it comes about that the same sentence is judged both to be paradoxical and to be straightforward, non-paradoxical. Okay. And the only solution is to reject the Pinocchio law, right? As the only solution to the similar problem with materialism will be to reject materialism. Okay, so finally, we come to materialism. Yeah, so the thing that corresponds to the Pinocchio law is this claim that each possible thought of a human is identical to a possible state of the machine that human is, right? Or it might not be a human being, it might be some other thinking machine that we've made ourselves. Doesn't really matter whether you run the argument about a human or some other non-human thinker. The point is that there can be a thinker who is at least equivalent to a human in its sort of intellectual sophistication, that is also a machine. So if materialism is true, it allows us to legitimately diagonalize. That is, diagonalize while we're just making innocent, straightforward physical statements. They're going to lead to paradox because those physical objects, those states of the machine, are also thoughts. Okay, they're identical to thoughts. So we'll find that our diagonal thought is paradoxical, but at the same time, according to materialism, also just a straightforward statement of physics. All right, now what is diagonal property? So let's see how we can construct that. So let's take a digital computer that's able to think conscious thoughts that are, of equivalent sophistication to those of a human being. So I would assume, for example, that this computer mind could understand this whole video so far. And let's say it's a standard computer. It's made of transistors, and these have sort of a binary, two stable states, 0 and 1. So the state of the whole computer at a given moment in time can be represented as a binary sequence of some finite length n, where n is the number of transistors. All right, and suppose the computer knows this, right? You say, hey, you're a computer made of n transistors. It says, okay, sure. And is able to form simple thoughts. I'm not assuming that the computer can understand itself completely. Just as we can't understand ourselves completely, there's no reason to suppose, even if you're a materialist, that a computer could understand itself completely. Okay, so I'm not assuming that. All right, now here we get this sort of self-reference going. The machine then might form the thought, some of my states have more ones than zeros in them. You know, the state is this long binary sequence. You know, there's going to be some definite number of ones and zeros. There might be more ones than zeros. So if the machine is thinking that thought, then it's in some state, right? Some state S. Now, it's then possible that the state S itself has more ones than zeros. And it might not, right? It might have more zeros than one, or the same number, but it's at least possible it would have more ones than zeros. And if it does, then we're going to call that an inclusive state. Now, what is the general definition? Well, notice in this case, it's an existential. There's claiming that some or at least one state has a certain property, and this is a physical property. You know, the number of ones in that state is a physical property. It's not anything complicated. So we're going to define inclusive as meaning that in the state S, it's having some thoughts, okay, of the form, an existential form. Some state has the property F, where F is a purely physical property, like the one here, and also S has the property F, like the state actually has more ones than zeros in it. Okay, so that's an inclusive state. Now, an important thing here, an essential thing to the argument, is that inclusive itself is a physical property. And that might not seem right because it uses sort of semantic notion of an object having a property and so forth. It doesn't seem physical. But you have to remember that according to materialism, thoughts and so forth are themselves physical facts about the world. And again, it's helpful to think about Laplace's demon here. So if we provide Laplace's demon with any state S of the thinking machine, Laplace's demon can, as it were, read the mind of that machine. It can know whether or not it's thinking a proposition of the form. Some state has the property F, and it'll know what the property F is and whether it's a physical property, and it'll know whether the state S has that property. So based on just the physical facts that the demon has, it can infer, it can answer the question whether or not S is inclusive. And that means that, well, philosophers would say that inclusive supervenes on the physical properties. So basically that means that it is a physical property. At least we'll count that as a physical property here. Okay, so now we finally come to the argument. We've established that two premises here. Inclusive is a physical property, and because the machine is equivalent to a human, it can form the thought, some of my states are non-inclusive. Just sort of a bit like the Pinocchio sentence, you know, my nose is growing, okay? So if inclusive is physical, then so is non-inclusive. Negating a sentence doesn't sort of take it out of that physical domain. And then from, we can write from 2 here. Since the machine can form the thought, there must be some state call it D for diagonal, in which the machine does think that thought. And then because D is a state and inclusive is a property of some states, it must be that D is either inclusive or not. But from the way it's defined, D actually is inclusive if and only if it's not inclusive, for exactly the same reasons as with the Cantor diagonalization that I mentioned. If it's inclusive, then it must be non-inclusive, and so forth. All right, so there it is. Now I want to have a bit of reflection on this. You might still be thinking about that robocar and thinking, well, look, it has intentionality. It's you can see on the screen, it's aware that there's the pedestrian there and there's a red light and the car coming in from the left. It has understanding. So from the point of view of Laplace's demon, how is a human different from such a car? Is it just this one little belief that it can't have, this weird, twisty, diagonal belief? Well, I think it's much more than that. And I want to refer to an argument from Bonjour that I think it's helpful to see that this one little diagonal belief that it can't have is kind of like the tip of the iceberg. It seems to indicate that there's really no intentionality at all in a physical system like a robocar. All right. Now, let's think about Laplace's demon, or Mary, as I've mentioned. Philosophers use instead of Laplace's demon, basically does the same job for us. If Mary only looks at the car's computer, doesn't see the surrounding environment with other cars and cyclists and so on, and doesn't see those causal connections specifically that the symbols inside the computer program have to the external world, Mary won't be able to figure out what the computations mean. At least this is what Bonjour says, and it seems right to me. So the meaning from a physicalist perspective, and this is more specifically a functionalist theory, but that seems to be the only theory on the table. In order to know, or the meaning depends on the sort of functional role of these internal symbols within the computation. In order to know those causal roles, and therefore to know the meaning of the symbols, Mary would need to know about these external causal relations. It wouldn't be enough just to focus on the computer itself. All right. Now, he continues then by saying there's no reason to think that the internal structure of my physical and neurophysiological states could somehow by itself determine that I'm thinking about the weather rather than about the Middle East or the stock market. Okay, so making the same point. If Mary was just looking at his brain, it wouldn't tell her really what he's thinking about. She could see various sort of computations going on. This is all assuming physicalism, but it wouldn't actually give her the content of his propositions in his mind. Now, the problem with this, as Bonjour points out, is that a person is consciously aware of their own belief contents. So unlike with the robocar, where the meaning sort of seems to exist not just in the computer, but also in the external world, the human brain actually contains its own meanings, as he puts it here. It's an undeniable fact about conscious intentional content that I'm able, for the most part, to consciously understand or be aware of what I'm thinking about from the inside. Okay. If you just sort of, going through your day, you're thinking, oh, I should have some hamburgers for dinner or something. You know what that means. Okay, so my conclusion then is that even though physical systems like, for example, robocars can represent the world in a sense, this is nothing like what humans have. Humans have this intrinsic intentionality, which is rather mysterious, to be honest, but we have it, and the robocars don't. And so Even though my diagonal argument only shows that a physical system is going to lack one belief, I think that's probably just a tip of the iceberg. And it's my view that physical system probably has no genuine thoughts at all. It has sort of simulated thoughts. It can do things that require thought in a human, but it does them a very different way. All right, that's it. Thanks for watching.